The Mi-24 armed helicopter is the first heavy armed helicopter of the Soviet Union. Since it was equipped with the Soviet Army, it has participated in 30 wars and regional conflicts. As of today, it is still fighting bravely on the battlefield in Ukraine and Russia. In the 1990s, China, which was in urgent need of armed helicopters, obtained a Mi-24 armed helicopter from Pakistan. Although it was one of the best armed helicopters in the world at that time, after Chinese researchers deeply understood its characteristics and technical key points, they finally gave up the plans of imitation and purchased the Mi-24 armed helicopter, made its first flight in 1969. Its design is completely different from that of Western-style helicopters. Many designs are derived from the Mi-8 transport helicopter. Its design concept is to be a flying infantry fighting vehicle capable of delivering troops. Therefore, a cabin that can accommodate 8 soldiers is set up. The pilot and co-pilot of the Mi-24 armed helicopter are arranged side by side. After being equipped with the Army, the pilot reported that the field of vision was too narrow. The MIL Design Bureau then switched to a tandem cockpit and was equipped with the old weapon system, tested on the Mi-24B, thus giving birth to the classic Mi-24D armed helicopter with the project code of 246. The Mi-24D armed helicopter and the American Black Hawk helicopter are both 10-ton helicopters. The maximum takeoff weight is 11,800 kilograms, which is 1,800 kilograms heavier than the Black Hawk helicopter. The total power of the two TV3 117 turbos Haft engines is 400 horsepower, which is 400 horsepower more than the Tiget 700 Gus 701D engines of the Black Hawk helicopter in June 1972. To Mi-24D prototypes with new designed airframes replaced by Mi-24 were modified and completed. They were continuously tested until 1974. Then they were put into production at the Progress Aircraft Factory and the Rostov Helicopter Factory. A total of 350 were manufactured before production was suspended in 1977. After reducing avionics equipment, it was exported to Warsaw Pact countries under the number Mi-25. The NATO code name is Hind. Subsequently, the Mi-24 armed helicopter participated in the war in Afghanistan. At first, a batch of Mi-24A and Mi-25 armed helicopters were provided to the Afghan government army to combat anti-government guerrillas. But they seemed very vulnerable in front of anti-aircraft fire. One was shot down in the first month. In December 1979, the Soviet Army directly sent troops to Afghanistan, facing the guerrillas who fought and ran away. The Mi-24 armed helicopter with quick response ability became an important air support force. The Mi-24 armed helicopter is used to attack both fixed targets and targets encountered temporarily. The Soviet Army's ground combat operations are on the scale of divisions, brigades, and battalions, all of which require the support of the Mi-24 armed helicopter. At first, the Soviet Army operated single helicopters. After being attacked many times, they changed to operate in pairs. In this way, if one is shot down, the other can still perform cover and rescue tasks. Later, formations of 4 or 8 helicopters were more often used to enhance the strike effect. Usually, the theater of war is first bombarded by heavy artillery and the attack aircraft of the Air Force. Then the Mi-24 armed helicopters quickly follow up and hover around the target. Before the enemy organizes an effective counterattack, the helicopter groups, in pairs, maintain an interval of 1,200 to 1,500 meters and continuously carry out fire strikes. After the strike, the helicopters quickly climb and disperse in various directions. Other Mi-24 armed helicopters are always ready to replace teammates who have run out of ammunition, or patrol in pairs at an interval of 600 to 800 meters at a height of 1,500 to 1,700 meters in key areas. Once a suspicious target is found, warning shots are fired first to force the target, and then wait for the paratroopers to go down and OPers to go down and check. Later, the trucks of the Afghan guerrillas were all equipped with heavy machine guns. Therefore, once the Mi-24 armed helicopter finds a vehicle and attacks, at night, it flies along the highway or mountain path. Once vehicle headlights or camping lights are found, it attacks. However, for safety considerations at night, the flight altitude is only 80 to 100 meters. Once the guerrillas hear the sound of the helicopter, they will turn off all lights. The Mi-24 armed helicopter can also carry assault teams and land by sliding at a place 100 to 400 meters deep in the enemy's vital area. It is more suitable for such dangerous tasks than the Mi-8TV and Mi-8MTV-2 transport helicopters that lack armor protection. The Mi-24 armed helicopter has good armor protection. The outside of the cockpit is an externally mounted armor screwed on. There are armored backrests and armored headrests on the seats. The front windshield can block 12 7mm anti-aircraft machine guns. However, the Mi-24 is originally 1.5 tons heavier than the Mi-8. After squeezing in for paratroopers, it is half a ton heavier and becomes clumsy. Therefore, seats and some armor steel plates need to be removed, and the fuel volume and weapon load also need to be reduced by a part. Moreover, the cargo hold is only 1.2 meters high, and the soldiers staying in the cabin are also very uncomfortable. Another important task of the Mi-24 armed helicopter is to escort its own supply convoys. The Soviet Army needs hundreds of tons of supplies every day, but the supply convoy is the main target of guerrilla attacks. The guerrillas often hide on high ground and open fire violently on the Soviet Army. The escorting tanks can do nothing about this. The Soviet Army loses thousands of military vehicles every year. The Mi-24 armed helicopter uses 15 to 17% of its combat sorties to escort supply convoys. Usually, the Mi-24 armed helicopter patrols over the convoy at a speed of 150 to 170 kilometers per hour in a serpentine flight, 2 to 3 kilometers on both sides of the main road. Once an ambush by guerrillas is detected, it will flank and launch an attack. However, the helicopter has a fuel consumption rate of 7 to 5 kilograms per hour and can only fly for 2 hours. It is impossible to provide an interrupted escort. In order to replenish fuel and change pilots, the Soviet Army also builds a helipad at intervals. The main weapons used by the Mi-24 armed helicopter are 12 7mm for barreled machine guns and rocket launchers. The ammunition base of the machine gun is 1,470 rounds. It can fire 3.6 kilograms of bullets per second. After the bullets are fired, a fire line can be formed, which can tear a car in half. A salvo will make the ground bloody. However, due to the overly complex structure, after continuous firing of 400 rounds, the barrel will overheat, and a large amount of gunpowder residue will accumulate in the chamber, leading to a burst. Therefore, after continuous firing of 400 rounds, it needs to be cooled for 15 to 20 minutes. Later, the CSH-30K aircraft cannon was refitted. This cannon also has good accuracy. Within a few hundred meters, only 1 or 2 shells are needed to cut off a tree as thick as a bowl. Armor-piercing explosive shells often explode after penetrating the target, but when fired, it will produce a violent recoil, making the tail of the helicopter lift up. To avoid impact, it is generally fired at low speed. The short wing has 6 hard points. Usually, for a 30 to a Type 57mm or B-8V-20 Type 80mm rocket, launchers are hung. It can carry 128 S-5 Type 57mm unguided rockets or 80 S-8 Type 80mm unguided rockets. The inner pylon can also carry for 250 kg Fab to 150 or to 500 kg Fab 500 bombs. It can also use the MBD to 67U multifunctional pylon to carry 10 100 kg bombs. The most commonly used weapon is the S5 Type 57mm unguided rocket. However, this kind of rocket is relatively light in weight and is easily affected by wind deflection after being fired. In addition, its power is very small. When firing, the distance needs to be controlled as much as possible. The advantage is the inventory advantage. When the battle is fierce, it sorties 5 to 6 times a day. The inventory advantage is shown only before use. The ordnance technician needs to install the fuse with a special key. The S8 Type 80mm unguided rocket has a 3.6 kg warhead that can generate a large number of fragments. The killing radius reaches 10 to 12 meters. It has strong lethality in open spaces and is widely praised for its extremely simple and quick loading and unloading. Some Mi-24s are also equipped with S-24, S-25, and S-13 large caliber rockets. The damage area is very large, especially the S-24 large unguided rocket with a warhead weighing 123 kilograms. After installing a radio proximity (FUZE), it can generate thousands of fragments over the target. Large unguided rockets have a very long strike distance and can strike outside the guerrilla's anti-aircraft firepower. However, when this large unguided rocket is launched, there will be a lot of thick smoke, which may cause the engine to stall. Therefore, it can only be used by skilled pilots. Anti-tank missiles are more effective than large unguided rockets. The early 9M17M anti-tank missile uses semi-automatic radio command guidance. The missile is huge. Usually, it is packed in a 60 kg box. When hung on a helicopter, fix the missile wings with a wingspan of nearly 1 meter first. Check the charge, tracer agent, conduit, code and guidance system code. Install the guidance component. Connect the parting surface and fix the missile. The whole process takes 12 to 15 minutes. After the launch, the helicopter has to stay for a long time for guidance. The later 9M114 anti-tank missile only needs to be loaded into the launch tube and then put on the weapon pylon and flip a handle to lock it. Moreover, it only takes a few seconds for guidance. At a distance of 1.5 kilometers, it can fly into cave entrances or windows. When dealing with vehicles, the hit rate reaches 75 to 80% usually. The Mi-24 armed helicopter will first fire rockets in salvo at a distance of 1,200 to 1,500 meters from the target, then sweep fiercely with machine guns, and finally fly over at high speed and low altitude and drop heavy bombs. The bombs will explode after a delay of 30 seconds after being dropped to prevent the helicopter from being hit by the fragments of the explosion. The bombs can effectively destroy Afghan houses with thick walls. The guerrillas' forts usually have huge rocks or earthen walls up to 3 meters thick. 80mm rockets or cannon shells are simply useless. The Mi-24 armed helicopter will carry heavy bombs and bombard in rounds. Basically, there is no need to aim. It all depends on experience and luck. Sometimes, extremely powerful fuel air bombs are also used. The huge impact force causes the target to die in a horrible state, be burned, with eyes popping out. Those who are not dead will also be blind and deaf, and their lungs will be torn. However, affected by the dropping speed, height and plateau high temperature environment, the reliability is only 15 to 20%. It can only be used occasionally. When used, rockets are usually fired to detonate the oil gas cloud. The Mi-24 armed helicopter lacks a rear weapon. When the guerrillas often chase and strafe the evacuating Mi-24 armed helicopter, in order to protect against attacks from the rear. The Mil Design Bureau installed an SVT Type 12, 7mm machine gun tower at the rear. The gun is fixed under the crossbeam at the tail, with the muzzle facing out, and there are spacious glass windows on both sides. An additional machine gunner is added to the crew compartment. However, the actual combat is quite disappointing. It takes up too much space. The shooter only has a narrow passage to enter the position. Later, it is replaced with a 7.62mm PK General Purpose machine gun. Sometimes, a PK General Purpose machine gun is installed on each side. The PK General Purpose machine gun has good range and accuracy. There is also the lightweight infantry type or PK machine gun. The machine gunner must be vigilant at all times. Once a dangerous target is found, open fire to suppress it, in order to expand the fire sector in advance. The cockpit door is modified so that the upper part can be opened separately. The biggest enemy is the 12 7mm machine gun and small anti-aircraft gun. In the war, they shot down 42% and 25% of the Mi-24 armed helicopters, respectively. However, many systems of the Mi-24 armed helicopter have backup and redundancy designs. It doesn't matter much if the hydraulic system and main rotor blades are damaged. When one engine of the engine's automatic power regulation system is hit, it will automatically make the other engine operate at full load. Even if the oil pressure of the main gearbox drops to zero, it can continue to fly for 15 to 20 minutes. Most damaged Mi-24 armed helicopters can fly back to the base with injuries. 90% of the damaged helicopters can be repaired and returned to the battlefield. Pilots can repair minor damages by themselves. If the helicopter is severely damaged and makes a forced landing, a repair team can also go, and after simple treatment, it can fly back to the base. But still many Mi-24 armed helicopters were shot down. After being shot down, 30% of the pilots' casualties were head and spinal injuries. 9% were internal injuries, and 55% were burns. The pilots' blue flight suits are made of chemical fibers and are very easy to burn when exposed to fire. After melting, they stick firmly to the skin, making the pilots die a horrible death. After the Stinger portable air defense missile entered the Afghan battlefield, Soviet aircraft were shot down almost every day. The Soviet Army installed a large exhaust gas cold air mixer for the engine exhaust port of the Mi-24 armed helicopter, which can be reduced to 350 to 400 degrees Celsius. But this thing is too heavy and also loses 5 to 6% of power. So a water methanol injection system was installed to compensate for the power. But this thing often causes a sudden increase in power and is very difficult to control. Later, the TV-3117V engine that can provide 15 to 20% more power was replaced. However, the wind and sand in Afghanistan make the engine life very short. Especially a large number of turbine blades are damaged. The initial Mi-24 armed helicopter did not consider countering infrared missiles. After encountering the fatal threat of Stinger missiles, engineers installed 2 pairs of ESO-2V tracer flare launchers, each with 32 tracer flares on the tail boom. Later, they were moved to the back of the short wings of the fuselage, 3 on each side, installed at a certain angle forward. An L-166V1 ESO-EPV-1A active infrared jammer and an L-006 radar warning device were also installed. This radar warning device is not suitable for helicopters and has almost no effect on infrared guided missiles. The diameter of the decoy flare is also too small. The burning time and generated heat are limited, and it is difficult to lure infrared guided missiles. The active infrared countermeasure machine looks like a police light. The mechanism of action is to emit unstable pulsed infrared clutter to interfere with the infrared seeker. It is very effective against anti-aircraft missiles such as the SA-7, but it has little effect on interfering with Stinger air defense missiles in the middle and late stages of the war. Some Afghan government soldiers piloted Mi-24 armed helicopters and defected to Pakistan. Pakistan disassembled one of the Mi-24 armed helicopters and transported it to China for research. Chinese researchers who saw the real Mi-24 armed helicopter for the first time found that the layout of the Mi-24 armed helicopter is the same as that of most helicopters. It has a traditional main rotor and an anti-torque tail rotor. The cockpits of the two crew members are separated front and back. The pilot's cockpit is higher than the weapon operator's cockpit. The bulletproof cockpit cover is bubble-shaped. The cockpit is relatively high from the ground and needs to be climbed in with a ladder. The pilot's cockpit is at the rear, and the cabin door opens backward. Enter from the right side. The weapon operator's cockpit is in the front. Enter from the left side of the cockpit cover that opens to the right. The cockpit is surrounded by armor that can withstand the shooting of 12 7mm anti-aircraft machine gun armor-piercing bullets. A long rod-shaped airspeed tube protrudes from the right side of the nose. The antenna is installed on the frame of the weapon operator's cockpit. The pilot's cockpit contains the cyclic pitch lever, collective pitch lever and pedals, as well as the PKV and S-17 weapon sights for firing unguided rockets. The cyclic pitch lever of the weapon operator's cockpit is retracted on the front right side, and the pedals are hidden on the side and are only used to fly the helicopter in emergency situations. The KPS-53 of cannon bombing sight and missile sight occupy a lot of space. When a trigger on the collective pitch lever is pulled, the hydraulic system will move the cyclic pitch lever and pedals to the operating position. The horizontal field of vision of the weapon operator's cockpit is 270 degrees, and the forward and lower field of vision is 45 degrees. In combat, they must rely on the pilot to remind of threats. The pilot's horizontal field of vision is 20 degrees, and the forward and lower field of vision is 15 degrees. However, the right opening cockpit cover also blocks part of the field of vision, coupled with the main rotor rotating clockwise. So the pilot likes to turn left. The Mi-24 armed helicopter can take off vertically, but it is not very comfortable. So the pilot tries to tilt the tail up by 10 to 12 degrees as much as possible and let the front wheels touch the ground and taxi. In this way, it can accelerate quickly. It only takes 50 to 70 meters to take off from the ground. Before taking off, a series of cockpit switches need to be flipped. Start the APU to generate compressed air. Select the left or right engine in the main engine startup procedure. Press the start button on the panel to start the main engine. When the speed reaches 60% to 65%, the air starter will automatically shut down. Subsequently, the gunner activates the movement of the pedals and cyclic pitch lever in the gunner's cockpit. Then the pilot can operate the helicopter to taxi to the runway and take off. The Mi-24 armed helicopter has both a fast cruising speed and a sprinting speed. The short wings on both sides of its fuselage can provide about 25% of lift when in forward flight, enabling a sprinting speed of 335 kilometers per hour. In a high-speed state, its turning performance and climbing performance are also quite excellent. However, the short wings are prone to stalling. When rolling into a turn, the short wings will cause the fuselage to continue to bank. The cyclic pitch lever must be operated laterally to counteract it. But once the bank angle exceeds a certain angle, the cyclic pitch lever will no longer be effective. The high speed also makes the rotor load 50% greater than that of the Mi-8. When making a sharp turn or braking, the fuselage will fall sharply or tilt upward uncontrollably due to insufficient power and stalling. This requires the pilot to pull the lever vigorously to maintain the attitude in high temperature and high altitude environments. Insufficient engine power will make it difficult for the helicopter to maintain its attitude. When the Mi-24 flies at a speed of 250 kilometers per hour, if the bank angle exceeds 20 degrees, it will lose to 100 meters in altitude. Therefore, when flying at low altitudes, The pilot has no chance to make a mistake. Otherwise it may crash. To avoid this consequence, it is necessary to fly the plane gently at a low speed. But this is almost impossible in combat. If the pilot has to pull the lever to recover from a high-speed dive, the rotor may hit the tail boom. At this time, controlling the speed and the division of labor between the two crew members is extremely important. After the test flight, the pilot said, "Flying the Mi-24 armed helicopter is as difficult as walking on a tightrope." Among crash accidents, 50.5% are serious accidents, and accidents in which the crew is sacrificed account for 60.4% in general. The Mi-24 armed helicopter has thick armor, is sturdy and durable, has a simple structure, and has a high combat readiness rate and multi-purpose capabilities. However, it is complex to operate and has a large fuel consumption, and does not meet the needs of the Chinese military. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Russia also promoted the Mi-24 armed helicopter to China, but was rejected by China. If there had been no advanced testing, perhaps the main armed helicopter of China now would be the Mi-24 armed helicopter.